I'm going to go ahead and open us in prayer, and then we're going to do something prior to looking at these verses, related to these verses. Father, I thank you for the food you provided tonight. I thank you for your word that we can study. I do ask that you would help us to understand what it meant to the original hearers in context, and that we'd be able to apply it to our lives. I ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Depending on whether you're eating or not, Linda had some comments. She saw the video and had some comments on last week's Galatians. And I thought they were valuable and thought they were worth hearing. So
he was all wrong.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think in some ways she explained it better than I did in one section. So do you want to go ahead and...
Well, it was that verse where it was talking about, where is it, 5? For the Spirit, by faith, we ourselves eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness.
Yeah.
And I listened to everybody's thoughts on that, and I was like, I think this is not actually talking about something in the here and now, but it's ultimately our glorification.
Yeah.
Because we're already righteous before God now because of Christ. So there isn't any hope for that. But there is hope for that ultimate glorification.
And you mentioned it's true. It ties in well with Romans 8. Romans 8, a lot of people don't realize when it talks about, in 8:28, for example, it talks about, all things work together for good. Well, that verse has nothing to do with temporal things happening here now. The entire chapter, actually from verse 8 or 9 leading up to that, is all about glorification. It's our mortal body, our glorification, etc. And that whole thing is leading up to it. So what 8:28 is really saying is, no matter what happens, I'm guaranteeing you're going to be glorified in the end. And you're going to get your glorification. That's the good thing that's going to happen. It doesn't mean that if somebody's dying, God's going to heal them when you want him to heal them or things like that. So this again ties in with the language a lot of times that Paul tends to use for that as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's a number of other places in the different epistles where he uses similar language, still referring about glorification.
Yeah. I like that explanation of it, and like I said, whatever you choose is fine. But I like that explanation of what that, because we did wrestle a little bit with how do we hope for something that we already have.
Yeah.
Well, there's the righteousness we have, but ultimately the completion of our righteousness will be the glorification of our bodies. So, and sometimes we underestimate that too. I mean, it's going to be nice to have a perfect body as well, and it's something we don't think about as much. Well, maybe we do. I don't know, but the point is,
you don't.
Yeah, exactly. No, I
after
do.
your body starts giving you trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Tonight with my hip and my legs, I'm ready for a glorified body.
Well, I think the biggest thing for me is never having one single evil or off-putting thought or inclination ever.
Yeah, that too. Exactly. So, anyway, I wanted to bring that out before we start verse 7 tonight. If we look at verse 7, which is where we're going to start, Galatians 5:7. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? Fairly simple verse when you look at it as far as straightforward being, but what's he talking about?
Can you just read you said, who hindered you from, what was the word your translation used?
Obeying.
Well,
You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth?
okay, you did say obeying.
Yes. Well, there's food over there, including sushi and chocolate pie if you want.
Yeah, look at this cruise.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot bigger than normal.
Well, you bring food,
It's always a draw.
Yeah. So anyway, we got this verse 7 where we're talking about being hindered from the truth. One thing I want to say, or from obeying the truth. One thing I want to say here is there's an expression that's used in the English language that really fits here. Ignorance is bliss. Before the Galatians were told about obeying the law, they had no knowledge of the law. Their ignorance was actually allowing them to follow Christ properly and do the right things. It's only when these Judaizers came in and started talking about it, that's when they ran into problems, because this new thing was brought in which had nothing to do with what they should have been doing. One of the things I remember, and Linda can comment on this if she wants, but one of the things I remember Linda talking about before with me is, for a music teacher, it's much easier to teach someone who never had singing lessons than someone who had singing lessons from a bad teacher.
Yep.
First thing you got to do is untrain the person before you start training the person. If you've ever seen the movie The Untouchables, what happened? Where are you going to get, if all the apples are bad in your police force, where are you going to get a good apple? You go to the barrel, or you go to the tree rather, not the barrel. You don't pick it from it. So that's why they went back and got the guy from the academy and things like that, instead of going something who already was being paid off. It's kind of like the same issue here, is that really They were doing fine. They were running well. And Paul, when he says, who hindered you? Is he really asking the question, or what's he doing there? I mean, he's asking a question, but what's he really asking with who hindered you? Doesn't he know?
Yep.
What?
Well, yes.
Oh, okay. He knows. He knows. But who was it?
Well, the Judaizers.
Judaizers. I think in this case what you're saying is the English equivalent of a rhetorical question. You know, he's not saying, gee, I wonder who this really is. But basically, he's just putting in their faces, you guys are doing well, and now who hindered you? Well, it's obvious who hindered you. The Judaizers. The people coming, putting the law on them. Yeah.
Do you have that word definition for hindered in your notes?
No, I don't. Go ahead with it. Actually, I probably do, but go ahead. That's okay.
It's a really interesting word that he chose because it's basically one of the well-known meanings of this word is basically they did it with armies. They would go and they'd completely break up a road and destroy it so that it was utterly impassable.
I like that.
Yeah.
Makes it a lot more understandable.
Yeah. And
So
basically he's using an overblown word to say, well, wasn't overblown,
Yeah.
but
Who's making living your faith out impassable?
yeah.
Is basically what he's saying as far as hindering. Yeah, I like that. I like that. So basically what we're seeing here, and it's going to start getting strange in a few verses, you'll understand why. The hindrance here was the Mosaic Law. Was the Mosaic Law evil or bad? No. It was being applied to the wrong people because it had already been fulfilled. So the other thing we see here is following the law was preventing them from obeying the truth. And when you look at the law versus truth, again, remember, they're mutually exclusive. In this case, when you call it truth, law versus grace, mutually exclusive. In this case, it's strange to think about it, but following the Mosaic law was the lie. And he's comparing it to the truth. The truth was, don't follow the Mosaic law. The lie was, follow it. And the other thing is, the truth is that the law was dead. The lie was, the law is still binding. Want to look at Matthew 5:17. Somebody turn there if they could and read it to us. Because this verse is always thrown up at us when we talk about the law being dead. Matthew 5:17.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them.
Doesn't that sound like I'm all messed up in what I'm talking about?
Only if you read the first half only.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean,
Well, go ahead.
I
Talk to
figured
me.
you on purpose didn't want me to.
Yeah,
read that.
that's okay. Talk to me
Continue.
about what you're seeing in that verse. Why is that verse not a problem for us? There's a number of reasons, but why is that verse not a problem for us?
Well, he fulfilled it perfectly.
Okay.
Therefore, the perfect sacrifice has come. And it was prophetic at the time.
Right. This was written at the time. This was written about events that occurred during the life of Christ. During the life of Christ, he was under the law. If you look at Galatians 4:4, it says that Christ was born under the law. So at that time he said it, that was absolutely correct. It's still correct that he was a future event to happen. That by the time Galatians were written, it already happened. Number two, something I think we miss a lot of times. Paul said, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. Okay? I would say this.
Christ.
Christ said
Christ,
that,
sorry.
not Paul.
Sorry. Yeah, not Paul. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that catch. And if I start talking about Moses and the ark, please correct me on that one also. I think one thing we've got to look at is, I hesitate to ever say that Christ abolished the law, because the law was still a good thing that existed. It was fulfilled. In other words, to me, to abolish the law would have been to literally come in Christ to say, don't worry about it. We're just going to go on like it never even happened or pretend this and just throw it away.
Well, in the context of when he said that, I mean, he was breaking the Sabbath,
Right.
and doing so.
He
Like he
was.
was being asked, like, don't you care about the law?
Right.
So he was responding to that, saying, like, no, I haven't come to abolish it. I'm
Right.
going to fulfill it. I'm going to
Exactly.
tell you what it actually means. I'm going to
Right.
show you what it actually means.
Exactly. And he was giving them the correct interpretation
Yes.
of it.
Yeah.
And again, to abolish it would have literally been to just say, don't need a savior, don't need anything, just throw it away, no big deal, we don't care about the Mosaic law. He wasn't coming to do that. He was coming to say it's still holy, it's still good, and it's applicable now until we get to the point where Christ died. That's when the law was fulfilled. Once the law was fulfilled, we're fine. Now the reason I bring this up is because I guarantee if you talk to many people, especially in covenant theology movements, Presbyterian churches, things like that, you're going to have Matthew 5:17 thrown in your face. Because that's the verse they're going to go to, see, the law is still applicable. It was, it's not now. So again, remember also, instead of thinking about destroying the law, think of the terms of, is it binding? We really have the same thing in our legal system today, if you think about it. Laws are binding to the people that it has jurisdiction over. I'm not bound by the laws of Bosnia, for example, or something like that. I don't know what their laws are. I'm not bound by any of those laws. I am bound by the laws of Maryland. Often I object to that and don't like that because they're not fair in a lot of cases, especially some of the new ones they're talking about passing, which if they pass, they're, instead of increasing money, you're going to see businesses run from the state of Maryland. Okay, but the point being is that whether I like it or not, I am still bound to it. It's still binding on me. And that's what we're talking about with the law here. We're not talking about the law disappearing like it never existed or something like that. And that's an important point to remember, because the law was always holy. It was never something that was, Paul even brings up a couple of times, not just here, but other books. Does that mean that the law was bad? Was it evil? No, of course it wasn't evil. Anything else on verse 7? Did I see a
There's
hand?
just one other thing I was going to say about abolishing the law, because that,
please.
what you said applied definitely before Christ's death, but
Yes.
Paul uses that exact word
Mhm.
in one of the, or a couple of times in the epistles to say, it's destroyed.
Right.
What are you doing
Yeah.
with it?
Okay. I am corrected somewhat there. I
I was
understand.
trying to find where it was, but he literally uses the word abolish.
No, I believe you. I believe you. I believe you.
Just can't.
So again, what I said, the biggest thing I say with abolish, so it doesn't mean that it was evil or something like that.
No.
It just means that it's no longer applicable at all. And it's really not. All right, verse 8. In verse 8, we've got, this persuasion did not come from him who calls you. What's it say?
It's not from God.
Not from God. What's not from God?
Persuading you that you ought to follow the law.
Right, exactly. It's not God telling you to follow the Mosaic law. It is someone else. It's a false message that's not from God. Now again, we've got to look at it. It doesn't mean the law is evil because God still won't set it up, but it means God's not the one telling you this. Let me ask you a question. Verse 8 seems like it's almost so obvious it shouldn't even be necessary to say. Okay? Who's doing this to you? It wasn't God. It's obvious it wasn't God. My question to you is, why did the Galatians want to follow this? And why do we have similar situations today where people want to bring down laws on themselves that don't exist? I'm just asking for opinions here.
Makes you feel better about yourself.
Makes you feel better about
That's
yourself.
good.
You can get a checkbox.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. A little
Well,
pride.
and you don't have to decide on a case-by-case basis a lot of times.
You're right.
Or
Don't
I
have to
think
decide.
of the movie. There's a
There's
movie that
rules.
has this quote that is basically this. It's like people don't want freedom. They want to be controlled because it's
Wow.
familiar and it's
Not controlled by the person necessarily, but
Yeah.
controlled by this set of rules.
But unfortunately, it's true. I mean, even with the control, I think it's amazing to me today in our society. I didn't see it 50 years ago. It's amazing to me the people that are willing to give up freedoms because they want to be controlled by the external forces. And I think that's shifting more and more and more. It has been. That's personal opinion there. But either way, yeah, there's an easy way to determine what's happening if you know what the rules are, even if they're bad rules. But I think going back to what Linda said also, really we're talking about you got the checkbox, you got the pride, and both valid options here. You got the checkbox, you got the pride. Well, either one. I'm sorry. The point is you're checking it off and you're done with it. The problem with that is that number one, it robs the joy of the Christian life. Remember, we are in a relationship with God. It's not just check off the box, you're going to heaven or something like that. It is we're going to heaven because we are children of God. Again, Ephesians 1 is a great chapter to see that. John chapter 1 also goes into that. Other places in the Bible. So, yeah, please.
We have to crowd this.
Mhm.
So we just talked about like society wanting to follow rules,
Mhm.
which is part of that is I want to give up responsibility.
Mhm.
Who wants responsibility? Let me give it up. But so let me have the government just take care of things, and then I don't have to worry about it.
Mhm.
I don't have the responsibility. That's
Mhm.
I'm condemning that. So I'm going to now connect that to following the law,
Mhm.
where if, it seems like there's at least one attitude there that can say, well, I'm giving up responsibility of a relationship
Right.
for these checkboxes.
Right.
So
I agree. I think that happens, unfortunately. People wouldn't say that consciously usually.
right.
But unconsciously, they're looking for something like, hey, relationships are hard. It's much easier to have, here's my boxes that I have to check off, here's my things I have to do. You may not like them, but it's much easier to have that and to follow that. And I think a lot of people are willing to do that because of that. And again, consciously, they would probably never say that. Subconsciously, I think it happens a lot. So either way, the point is that we're trying to do something on our own, whether it's pride, whether it's easy to do the things, whatever it is, we're giving it up on our own there. The other thing that I want to say is, again, remember, law is not compatible with grace. And because law is not compatible with grace, it will rob you from your joy you have in the Christian relationship. Now let me say something else on the other side of it. This doesn't mean, when a cop pulls you over for doing 94 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, you can say, hey, I'm not under the law here. That's not what it means. There are laws for our society. Did I tell you guys about what happened last night maybe? This morning in Sunday school where I told you.
Yeah, well,
But for the rest of you that weren't there, our community the police put in traffic cameras on Church Road.
I've seen
Okay.
that. Oh my goodness, it looks like
Yeah.
military turrets.
Well, here's what happened. They brought in these rolling cameras. They've only had the one there on the one direction for maybe 2 weeks. The other one's been there for about 6 weeks total. Okay. In the first month they had those cameras, and a violation is only if you are 12 miles an hour over the limit. If you're 11 over the limit, they're not counting as a violation. Okay. There has been over 18,000 violations in a month. In addition to that, the high score was 94 miles per hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. Oh, I've seen Church Road near where we live in
Near where
Bowie.
we live in Bowie.
It is not a high-speed road, okay?
Yeah.
In addition to that, 28 of the violations were 70 or above in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. So again, there are people that obviously feel they're no longer under the law, but that's the wrong law. We still have civil law, which we have to follow. We still have other laws like that. That's not talking about any of this stuff. What they're saying is Mosaic law is dead in our lives, not that we have no laws at all. They're still right and wrong.
The laws of physics are still there.
Laws of physics are still, exactly.
They hit a tree.
If you decide you want to ignore gravity for the day, you may be in for a surprise. Exactly. Yeah, that reminds me, I shouldn't say this, but my favorite line in all the years of The Simpsons, when it used to be decent in the beginning, my favorite line of all of it, was when the school was closed and Lisa couldn't go to school, and she invented a perpetual motion machine. And Homer screams at her, Lisa Simpson, in this house we obey the laws of thermodynamics. Anyway, actually, totally off topic, but since we're on scientific jokes, I'll give him my favorite scientific joke, okay? Heisenberg's driving down the road and the cop pulls him over. Cop walks up to him, he says, you know you're doing 85 miles an hour? He says, great, now I have no idea where I am.
yeah.
The theory, you can't know for sure, you can't know with any certainty where you are and the speed you're going. You can only know one or the other, you can't know both. So when a cop tells me 85 miles an hour, great, I have no idea where I am. Anyway, off of physics and back to the Bible. Pretty much that's verse 8. Does anybody else have anything else in verse 8? Please.
That very first word he uses,
Yeah.
persuasion,
Mm-hmm.
this particular word, it's the one and only use in the New Testament.
Okay.
And it actually adds a little element of understanding to it, because what it means really is confidence and reliability. So they've like switched around and they're now confident in this whole legal thing instead
Exactly.
of the gospel that Paul was preaching.
Good. I like it. I love having my Greek scholar along tonight.
So I'm no scholar.
Last week, no, you are. I seriously, with all the degrees I've gotten and everything else, I often turn to her for Greek because she is excellent in Greek, especially
No,
in interpreting it.
I just look it up.
Well, not only look it up, you really enjoy it and get into it.
Well, that too.
Ask me to look it up in Greek, I'll be there all day.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Well, no, she you give her 3 words out of a verse and she may spend 6 hours on it or something like that. So I've seen that happen. Anyway, verse 9. Verse 9 is interesting. Actually, verse 9 is, a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough. Anybody want to talk to me about what leaven is and how it's used in the Bible?
I mean, we've come across this before, right?
Yeah, probably. But in the Old Testament, for example.
We would call it yeast.
Yeast, exactly. What happens though? What is it symbolic of typically? What do they do at Passover with the yeast products and stuff like that? Does anybody know about what happens in Passover?
They don't use the leaven.
They not only don't use it, you have to sweep out your entire house to make sure there's not even a crumb of leaven in your house. They do that today even. You can't have a single crumb of leaven anywhere in that house. It's absolutely prohibited. And leaven is virtually always associated with sin in the Old Testament and the Mosaic Law. When you're talking about leaven, you're talking about sin. Okay? Now, what did Paul just do here? And is this going to freak out the Jews that read this? Think about it. What did he just do in this verse? Is he talking about sin here creeping in on the Galatians, or what's he talking about?
I think he's saying like one it's the bad apple ruins the whole thing, right? It's like all it takes is a little bit, and it's going to mess all of you up.
He is. You're right. But here's the thing. He's not talking about sin here so much. What he's talking about is the leaven is the law. Now think about that. You've said if you're a Jew and you've had your entire life been taught the most holy thing in the world is the Mosaic law, and the sinful thing is the leaven, and suddenly Paul is calling the Mosaic law the sinful thing. He's not really I shouldn't say sinful thing. He's not saying it's sinful. He's absolutely not saying that. But what he is saying is the thing that is creeping in on you now is the law. It's not the sin we're talking about here. Now, it is sinful to do what they said. Don't get me wrong.
Is he talking about the law, or is he talking about the people who are saying...
I think he's talking about them following the law. I think he's talking about, with the little leaven, I think he's actually talking about the people following the law.
So the reason why I was asking is because verses 7 and 8, 7 is like, who hindered you from obeying the truth, right? So
which is rhetorical.
The context
Mm-hmm.
right before this, he's talking about the people, right? And then
And in verse 8 is, okay.
Yeah, that who
didn't come from God.
It didn't come from God,
right?
And so a little leaven leavens the whole lump.
Right.
But it's like we're talking about people here.
Well, you
influencers.
could apply it to the people who are bringing the message, but I think the message has to be applied to also. I really think you have to look at it and go, the Mosaic law is what he's talking about. I agree with you. The people are bringing this false message, but what he's doing, either way you look at it, for a faithful Jew, this thing is flipped around so much. It's incredible, and I think it's deliberate.
But in verse 10, he goes right back to a person. I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view, and the one who is troubling you will bear the penalty, whoever he is. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. It just feels like the entire context is about person.
That's the person.
Law. I don't know the Greek. So.
I understand. No, that's okay. No, it's not a Greek thing here as far as that goes.
I would be inclined to agree, actually.
Okay. Either way, I would say, even if it's about the person, what is the message the person's bringing? You still got to look at that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's that, and it is the two messages, but it's also the people bringing it, because he also is referring to the one calling you. This is not from the one calling you, which is Christ.
Yeah, and in addition to that, what I was going to say is you've got to look at it, even if you apply it to the people, don't even allow one of these people to come in and tell you this message. Because the little leaven leavens the whole. However you apply it, I think by implication, even if it's about the people, I have no problem with saying that. I think you still have to include the law in it, because that's the message that's being brought to them, obey the law. Mm-hmm. And again, I think to any Jew that heard that, this would be an absolute affront to the Jews.
And the way you said that, I want to say that is a tactic. I don't have any examples, but I know if you want to also lost for the word here, but if you want to force somebody to think about, because he's using this phrase in a way that the Jews normally would not use it, right?
Yeah.
So he's now got them questioning what he means by this, probably.
Well, he certainly got him questioning the message and the messengers. No question. That's what and again, I think he's doing it deliberately to shock them.
Yeah.
You couldn't say anything more shocking to the Jews than to say this.
But hopefully, in order to get them to think about what he's saying.
Yeah, the shock is almost like, think of the shock as more like a, the paddles when somebody has a heart attack.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, that kind of shock. This would have been a good thing for Paul to shock them this way. So I think you got to look at it that way. That's personally how I'm looking at it, okay? The other thing I was going to say is leaven is always associated with corruption. So when you think about leaven in our terms, leaven, we still have leaven. I mean, think about this. How many of you have forgotten about a loaf of bread that has leaven in it and put it in a bread box or something for 2 weeks and come back and seen the science experiment that's been created, okay?
Green fur?
Yeah, green fur, exactly. I used to talk about my mom. She was so cheap. She'd buy furry style bread. So, we had, you had white bread, whole grain breads and furry style breads. So the point being is that, this is something where you can see what happens to leaven with corruption. But think of also things like mold in your house. Let the mold start and see what happens. Rust on a car. Let the rust start on a car. All of these are things that you look at that they're creeping corruption is what happens. And that's really important about leaven, is to realize even a little bit of leaven. I mean, leaven is great. I love leaven in cooking. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love fresh breads. But leaven is not good if you let it sit around for a while. Yeah.
Did Jesus, I'm trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
So, didn't he calm the storm one time when he calmed a storm or something?
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the gospel accounts, he says something about leaven or something about bread, the same kind of idea.
Yeah.
And the disciples are like, "Did you bring bread?" I didn't bring bread.
Exactly.
Right? Because they just totally get it. But I can't remember where that is. Am I misremembering that?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I feel like it was I feel like it was a storm.
I remember
So I'm just
something
wondering
about
if
them
if Paul was like,
misunderstanding bread
what are
as
they-
physical, where he was talking about the bread of life. But I
Maybe
could
it
be
was
wrong
that.
on
Maybe it was
that. But
that.
that's, I don't remember where. You know, and again, this the type of thing is, whether you're talking about physical bread or whatever, well, the other thing, I would say, I would not apply the corruption thing to the bread of life. Let me take that.
Yeah.
But in the physical
Just remember
sense,
the bread.
no, in the physical sense, the bread always was corrupt. Now, let me say this. That's for leavened bread. Unleavened bread, I go to the store and buy crackers that have been, maybe you look at the expiration date, 2 years away, a year away, things like that, and they're usually fine to eat. Without leaven, they don't corrupt the same way. They'll eventually break down and things like that, but they don't have corruption the same way. Oyster crackers are a good example of unleavened bread, basically, that type of thing. Well, they'll eat them 3 years later. They may not be as tasty, but
Well, they get stale. Well, that's the
They
time
get-
we're using the Lord's Supper.
yeah, exactly. They get stale.
But they don't get moldy.
They don't get moldy. They don't have the
No.
corruption, is what I'm saying. Stale, yes, but not corruption. You were going to say something.
Well, yeah, it just occurred to me when looking at this again. Verse 9, a little leaven leavens the whole lump.
Yep.
Basically, isn't that referring to circumcision? Well, you don't have to follow the whole law, but you need to
Right.
be circumcised,
Yes.
even though you're
That-
believing this.
Yeah, and the circumcision, I think, was used as the example of the most obvious thing that was showing from the law. If you're doing this,
Right.
remember, a few verses before this, I forget where he had said, if you circumcise, you're bringing in the whole law. You're not bringing in a part of the law.
Right.
By the way, we skipped over this. What's it talking about with leaven in the lump? For you people that do cooking in here, what are we talking about with leaven in the lump?
Well, you usually leave it rest and it grows.
Yeah, but what also happens, you can also, can't you take the leaven and take a piece of it and then it, you
Well,
put
if
it.
you're doing sourdough or something like that,
Yeah.
that's like the basic, what do you call it? The leaven.
Yeah, I mean, you can have 3-year-old sourdough in your sourdough
Oh yeah,
bread,
some
and
people
it
have
just
had it
keeps.
for 25 years. It's
Right,
the same
why?
start.
Because it keeps doing this,
Yeah.
and it's funny. That corruption initially is actually kind of tasty, but anyway,
Well, it is.
it is. I mean, I love fresh baked bread. That's that kind of bread, not sourdough, but fresh baked bread.
Beware that leaven of
But yet,
This
this
whole
lump,
passage 2 through 12
Yes.
is kind of talking about circumcision.
yeah, it
Verse
is.
2, he's talking about circumcision.
Yeah,
And down in 12, he says, I wish those who unsettle you would mutilate themselves.
right. But I think what
The
you
whole
got.
passage.
I would
that's
agree.
Kind of supporting what she's
I would agree, but what I would say is circumcision in this throughout Galatians is used to symbolize the law. So in other words, he is talking about physical circumcision, but he's also, when he's saying circumcision, he's saying circumcision, if you're doing that, you're bringing in the Mosaic law. And think about it. Of all the things you could do to yourself, what is maybe the most painful and the most stupid thing to do? And you're bringing that in. If you've done that, you're bringing in the whole Mosaic law.
Verse 4, you are severed from Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Circumcision.
Yeah.
Yep. So again, with this little leaven thing, it's basically saying you can't bring in a little bit of the law. I would say this, I don't think it cuts us off from salvation, but I think often in churches we find we've done the same thing. Not as much in this church as a lot of others, to be honest with you. I've been to other churches where I've seen it, and they've got, if you want to blow your nose with a handkerchief, there's a law in that church for how to blow your nose with a handkerchief. I guarantee it. It's just that kind of thing. So my point being is that I don't see that so much in this church, but it is something to watch out for. Something where sometimes what we're doing is we're taking our own personal opinions and substituting them for right and wrong.
So legalism, you mean?
Legalism, yeah. And legalism kills relationships. It's that simple. Now that doesn't mean unrestricted in what we do. Obviously, there's still right and wrong. It's just that legalism is not going to be what we're talking about. So that's the difference there. You have to remember, there are other churches that go to the other extreme we've encountered, where literally, in the one case, the pastor walked into a strip club and had no problem with it because, hey, I've been forgiven. No, you haven't read the rest of the Bible. Go back there, read and see what it says. So there's obviously extremes on both sides, but legalism or antinomianism, either one, cause problems for the relationship. Anything else on verse 9? If not, we're going to do verse 10. I have confidence in you in the Lord that you will adopt no other view, but the one who is disturbing you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. Thoughts on that? Why is Paul confident on this? Why is Paul's saying, I'm really confident you're going to come back and do the right thing? Why?
God is influencing the other person?
Well, no.
Or because he knows it well enough?
Well, think about this. How was Paul related to the Galatians?
It's their spiritual father.
He was their spiritual father, and he was injured, and they took care of him for a long time. He taught the Galatians probably as much as any church that you can find. And he was closer to the Galatians, I think, than any other church you could find. Remember, he was saying they'd pluck their eyes out for him if they could. I think what Paul's really saying is, I'm confident that with me coming back now and correcting you with this letter, you're going to get it because you've got a good foundation, and then you're going to understand that you can't do it this way. So I think that's really what he's saying in this. That's at least my opinion on that. Paul taught them. Not only that, this is something where they ought to know better. They don't need a word from God in order to know, hey, this is what we ought to do. They already know it. I mean, let me ask you a question. There are people that don't obey it. But when you're doing 60 miles an hour down Route 3, and that light turns red and you've got plenty of time to stop, do you really need a word from God saying, stop at this red light? I mean, think about it. No, we know you stop at the red light. You're supposed to, at least, okay? So that's kind of what I'm saying. In some cases, not to condemn a group, but in charismatic churches, sometimes I've seen it, where they want a word from God before knowing what to do. Well, your word from God is right here. We got the word from God. There may be other things where we need direction on or something like that, but basically, we already know a lot of these things. And it's not just charismatic churches, but especially in charismatic churches, I've seen that. Again, not to put them down, because I've got a lot of good Christian friends that have been charismatic. I've associated with them. I think they're wrong in certain areas. But there's still many dedicated Christians in the charismatic churches. So anyway, what I was going to say is on this, no, I think this is something where, again, he knew the Galatians have been brought up better. It's almost like when you got a kid who's been brought up, and he's been brought up in a good household and everything else, and he does something stupid. All you got to kind of do is correct him and say, you know better than this. Go back to your roots. You don't have to slap him down hard or something a lot of times. I think that's what it's talking about here. So, let me see. Other thoughts on verse 10. Any other thoughts on the first half of verse 10? I want to talk about the last half after this. If not, the last half of verse 10. But the one who is disturbing you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. And he's talking about God's judgment here. Paul, I think, is saying to them, guys, whoever's doing this to you, and whether he's talking about a specific person that he knows, or this group, or whatever, whoever's doing this to you is going to face God's judgment. Sometimes that is very difficult for us to realize in life, because honestly, I've seen a lot of people where I want to carry out the judgment right then and there on the spot, okay? And it doesn't mean let people get away with anything. But what it does mean is there are times when you have to turn it over to God. When I was in Bible college, my best friend always had an expression he would use. Vengeance is mine, thank you, God. So, modified it like that. That's not true. He's joking, obviously. But the point being is that, when we're looking at this, God will eventually take care of this, and will take care of these people. And not only that, if you think about it, basically most of these people pushing this are going to end up in hell. If nothing else, they're going to have eternal judgment. Now, I have another question for you. Does this mean that the Galatians lost their salvation, or were not going to get their salvation, or anything else in this? Because he's talking about people that are really, through this whole thing, that are separated from God.
No, he does not mean they're going to lose their salvation.
Okay, why?
I just answered the first
Oh, okay, just answer the first one. I agree with you. I think there's two things. Number one, if we come to God trying to be saved through works plus grace, we're not going to have salvation in the first place, okay? But if we have salvation by grace, and then we start doing these things and screwing up in these ways, it's not going to lose the salvation, but it will lose the value of the relationship. It'll push us away from God. So that's really what he's saying. In this case, I think he's talking primarily to believers. I believe most of the Galatians, if not all of them in that church, were believers. He's writing to believers, and what he's saying to them is, guys, you're not going to lose your salvation, but you are going to lose all the joy you've had from this. You're going to lose everything you should from it. And again, it's almost like somebody who has $5 million in the bank, but doesn't know it, doesn't say anything about it, never uses it, and just sits there till the day they die. There never any value to that. You could have used that $5 million to have a nice dinner and to help people or do whatever you wanted to with it, okay? Very similar here. It's not they're going to lose their salvation, but they will lose the joy and be robbed of the joy of their salvation, I believe. Anything else on verse 10? If not, we'll try verse 11. But I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why am I persecuted? Then the stumbling block of the cross has been abolished. Okay, what's he talking about here? I think what you got to look at here is he's saying, if I were out here preaching circumcision, would the protesters be out here? Would these other people be out here? The reason that he is being persecuted is because he is preaching a gospel which is saying you don't need to be circumcised. What he's saying is he's not just going along with the flow, and if he was, they'd be fine with him. You know, look at a lot of the popular preachers today. A lot of the popular preachers today, they're not facing, even the media gives them a pass a lot of times. Why? Because they're not preaching the gospel. They're preaching whatever they want to. There may be a kernel of the gospel in there in some cases. But basically, if you preach, if you've joined the LGBT movement with your church, if you're preaching the, on and on and on, especially now, we've got I keep forgetting the name, He Gets You, is it? Whatever.
Jesus gets us.
Yeah, He gets us. That whole thing. If you look at that, that is not the gospel of truth. Because basically they're saying, no repentance, no change, nothing else, simply He gets you. I agree that Jesus will take us wherever we are and bring us in to be in a relationship with Him. But it doesn't mean no responsibilities, nothing to do or anything else. What they're advertising on that is just join in because you're already saved, no problems, you don't have to change a thing. What they're missing is it's a gospel without repentance. And there's a lot of other things missing on that also. But my point being is there would be no persecution. If we change this church today and we started preaching that everybody's really saved, if we started preaching that gay marriage is okay, if we started preaching that abortion is fine, if we went on and on and on, you know something? I bet the media would love us. Not only, if we came out, we used to be this way, now we're this. I bet we could be on local news stories, I bet. We'd be in the papers. Because this wonderful, tolerant church is now out there.
I'm not sure if we would make the papers because there's a lot of churches that are like that.
Right.
Now,
Well,
and so it's really nothing
the
special.
reason I'm saying is the flip.
Yeah, but having one
Going
that was
from a
this,
Bible teaching
go
church,
to the other,
that's right, going from a Bible
We'd
teaching
have to
church
do-
to that.
we'd
That's
have
what I
to
think
do
would get us the
that,
papers.
But there was
But either way.
in a Facebook group that I'm in,
Mm-hmm.
a closed group, somebody was actually saying, "Hey, I want some recommendations for churches. I'm looking for," and then there was this long thing that they were looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, they were looking for a church that was more tolerant of things, and like the views on women should be this, and the views on blah blah blah
Right.
blah blah. And so they didn't want the conservative thing, like, yeah, we're looking to go every now and then,
Mm-hmm.
and like it. And it was just, I had never seen someone write down so specifically what they wanted, what they were looking for in a church that was so
Well, basically
very
just saying,
not.
I want to keep doing what I'm doing,
Yeah.
but I want to feel like God approves of me.
Yeah, they just wanted to bring some morality into the
Just
children's
get it right.
lives and stuff.
They want to be told that God approves of what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I have seen and heard people actually come out that way, and they're looking for a church. They want a church that's tolerant of
Yeah, but
and
it's
they
like
want
in print.
right. And tolerance has become the word tolerance used to be a good word. It's been butchered by our society.
That's the one thing I don't understand that really, because I mean, if that's your worldview, then why bother joining a church? You know?
Well, it's a good question, but I think Clint hit a little bit on this. Is it basically you're looking for people that still want to feel like they're connected to God somehow? And let me say something else too. It's a cheap country club.
Yeah.
Worst case, you pay 10% for your dues.
Well, you're going to have generally nice people.
That's what I mean.
There, and it's a place for your kids to grow up.
Right.
You know, so.
It's your if you don't have a good church, that's your fellowship area. These
Yeah.
churches. I mean, let me say this. I know it's an extreme example, but some of my clients are country clubs, the high-end country clubs in this area. Okay. Right now, if I remember correctly, first off, there's about a 5-year waiting list to get in on the one. Initial entry is $125,000, and you have to commit, I think, to like spending $75,000 a year in the club, and other things as well. Okay. Now that's also cheap compared to a club like Congressional. Congressional years ago, when I did work for them, they were, I think, $250,000 entry fee. and then the annuals were, insane. My point is, hey, if you can't afford a country club, which I wouldn't want one anyway, you can't afford a country club, go find a church that's got fellowship. They'll probably go play golf or something like that as well if you want guys to do that. You want a pool, I'm sure they can find a community pool or something, whatever.
Yeah,
it's fellowship.
I guess. I
agree with you personally.
I've always believed in God, but I
Right.
never wanted to run out into a church until
Right.
a couple
Why
years
would you
ago.
go to church if you didn't believe in the gospel?
I mean,
that's what I feel. But
Yeah.
I understand. But there's still people who want fellowship. The other thing too is, I'll get right to you. I still think that people that are doing this don't recognize that they still have a need for God, and that need for God is still drawing them to a church, even though it's the wrong church and it's not really fulfilling anything. Go ahead.
Which one?
Either one of you.
Just
Go
had to
ahead.
finish writing. Does it go maybe back to a fundamental misunderstanding of what heaven actually is, and what our point, what our purpose? Okay, so what is the chief enemy, right? And maybe people want to go to a church not just to feel better about themselves, but they have an idea of what heaven is.
Yeah.
And so they think, oh well, heaven is where good people go, and heaven is where it's going to be all good.
Right.
And if I do these things here, then things will go well with me on this earth, which is never promised. In fact, it's the exact opposite.
Right.
It's promised us. Like we need to be sharing in the sufferings
Right.
of Christ. Right. But this fundamental misunderstanding
I think that plays into it.
of what, and so that's why people may want that.
Let me throw something else into that I think applies to it. Liberation theology. The idea that if you're not familiar with that, basically you're not saved individually, you're saved by elevating the groups around you. Okay, big in Central America and South America, but has also become big in the U.S. I know people that adhere to this. I've heard Barack Obama say it out loud on videos and stuff like that. He absolutely was teaching liberation theology. So the point being is, when you think about that, why do you go to church? Maybe so you can help elevate the rest of the people around, make your community better. So yeah, I think there's an element of that as well, where that's where the good people go. That's where the good people, and it plays into the idea of you may act that way because of a fundamental misunderstanding of what heaven is. So I agree, that ties in. Yeah. Each person has their own motives.
Sure.
But that's certainly one of the possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, there's even some of the, if you look at some of the I'll call them debates. Some of them are real debates. Some of them are just discussions. But,
Right.
You have atheists and all. There is more common now with a lot of these atheists.
Yes.
Recognition about the good that religion,
Right.
I'll say religion, does for society.
Right.
And they're coping with that.
Right.
So, and you could have people joining just for, well, I don't believe this, but I recognize that somehow this is good for society and
Yes.
good for my family, so
They only want certain types of religion, but you're right.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right. I agree. Let me say this. Let me take that back to Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin said very clearly that if people stop believing in God, the republic would be over. That's it. It's end. And Ben Franklin was definitely not I would not call him a Christian. He was a deist. Right? He was a member of multiple churches in multiple denominations that didn't even agree with each other. Why? Hedging his bets. So
Adams said something like that too.
He might have, I don't know.
Like,
Adams?
I don't remember that.
He was more conventional Christian, I think.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
But it was more like
Well, hey, let me say this. What Franklin said could have been said by a believer as well and been accurate.
right where this isn't sufficient
Right.
for a government
Right.
in
That would
a
make
land
sense.
that doesn't have
That would make sense, because a lot of the early leaders are basically like, the only way this republic will work is if you keep God at the center of it. Because otherwise, you know what you're going to have? You're going to have people that are going to enter into office, and there's going to be cronyism, and you're going to have nepotism, and you're going to have people just doing it to get the money, and you're going to have senators that are in office, for 4 million years. It just
never happened.
It never happened. That's what I mean. Think about it. We have removed God and left the republic, and we got what Franklin prophesied, basically. And if you look at it, especially look at the House. The House, I think their salary's up now to about $190,000, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that area. It was lower, and all these guys come out multimillionaires and higher. And so, how are they doing it? Look at Nancy Pelosi and her stock trades. She is just a miracle stock trader. You just should follow her on whatever she buys, because you're going to get rich. Her and her husband. How do you think they do it? That's what we've got right now. We have a government that's a republic without God, And while it still functions better than the other governments in the world, it's certainly not, it's certainly got problems because we've abandoned God over the last 50, 100 years or whatever. Now let me say something else here about the persecution. Paul's saying he's being persecuted. We know that, okay? Do we have a clue as to what group is I don't mean Judaizers now or anything. Who is persecuting him? The Romans? The centurions? Are they following him? Why? What do we know? Why do we know it's not them?
Well, they considered what he was preaching still part of Judaism. Which was
They considered it part of Judaism, and not only that, let's say that there was a debate over circumcision, whether to be circumcised or not.
Yeah.
And the Roman prefect is going to stand up and go, whatever, I don't care. It's not something the Romans would have cared about. Okay, it's also an indication of something else. It's an indication that I have insisted that Galatians is one of the earliest, maybe possibly the earliest, but one of the earliest books written by Paul. I think you're looking at about 50 AD at the latest, most likely, probably 45, 50 AD. The point being is this: if you got into the 60s or something like that, it wouldn't have been just the Judaizers. Now, don't get me wrong, it was not global persecution of the Roman Empire, but there could have been other people who were getting upset as well, because Nero, for example, in the last half of his reign, did not like Christians. So I think it's fairly safe to say it's not only early, but clearly it's the Jews persecuting him. And remember, the Jews were sending groups to go from place to place to place to destroy what he was doing. It's funny, I don't know if any of you probably don't know about this. Many, many years ago, Jews for Jesus has a presentation at the Bowie High School. Okay, do you know what happened? The Jews in the temple nearby went and did things like stood in the road, and as cars came down the road, they told the people, if you're going to, that's been canceled for tonight. You just go on. Sorry, we just had to cancel it for tonight. They did all kinds of stuff like that. And they did everything they could to stop it from happening. And not only that, they followed them around the country. Not only that, there was a cartoon my dad did for one of the papers. He was the paper then, and it condemned the people that did that. Well, the letters that came in, everything, hang the guy and hang the cartoonist and everything else. If you look, the Jews for Jesus, he was in contact with the leader of the Moshe Rosen at the time, I think it was the leader of Jews for Jesus, and he looked at all these these letters that came to the newspaper, and you could take the exact same letters, just change the name from all around the country. You had them, every city they visited, the letters were about somebody, and they were following them place to place to place, the Jews for Jesus, and it was something where they despised them. Well, you've got the same situation here with Paul, where the Jews were actively sending out people to stop him. It wasn't passive, it was active. And think about it also, before I start condemning them totally, in their mind, they really were zealously working for God. They weren't, but in their mind they would have been. So it's not something where they thought they were doing the work of the devil or something, even though they were. They were actively trying to do God's work, but it was the wrong thing to do. The other thing I want to talk about here is the word where it talks about, let me see, stumbling block, okay? This word stumbling block is actually the word scandalon. We obviously get our word English and scandal from that word. But when it says here, then the stumbling block of the cross has been abolished. Some of the words translated for scandalon are offense, affront, causes anger. I think a better root word for that is a snare or a trap, okay? Where, in truth, what it is, the people that don't believe in the cross, it is a snare to them. It's a trap. They fall into not believing in Jesus, and that's a trap. So either way you look at this, the point is, because there's a number of translations you could have for scandalon, but I think the snare or the trap idea is something that probably is present here as well. Certainly an affront fits as well. But it's not just an affront, it's an affront that's going to trap them into something that essentially going to put them into hell. So again, just bringing that out a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What you're saying probably makes perfect sense, but
That's okay.
it says that in that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. Maybe I'm just getting.
Yeah, he's saying
I might
if-
be getting up in
if he were-
double negatives here,
Right.
but like,
if he were preaching a false message, then the offense of the cross would be removed. So when he says about the offense being removed, he's not talking about his preaching. Look at the first part of it. He's saying, if I were to preach circumcision. So basically, if it was a false message, it would remove that offense.
right. But did you said the offense of the cross, the scandal of the cross was No, I can't remember what.
Well, I
you
think
said it was.
Snare.
The
it's a
cross
snare.
was-
It's a snare.
Didn't Paul say somewhere, where was it? Stumbling block to the Greeks.
Yeah, that's in Corinthians.
um,
1 Corinthians, I think.
something else to the Jews.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Exactly.
But he has said scandalon
right,
for the Greeks in
Right.
that verse.
right, exactly.
But you were saying it was the trap of not believing in the cross,
Yeah,
But
the trap is if you don't believe in the cross, you're going to hell.
right?
That's the snare.
Right.
The trap has
If
been
you think of it
removed.
as this is how
okay.
a Jewish person at the time would have phrased it. A Jewish person would have said the cross is a snare.
And the other thing too, you got to remember, here are guys who are literally doing what they think is right by following Paul and everything else, and by doing what's right, they are essentially trapping themselves in this snare, which is an affront also as well.
Okay, hold, let me,
Yeah.
let me, and this may not be a valid thing to do.
Okay.
But, okay, if I'm still preaching circumcision,
Mhm.
then the offense of the cross has been removed.
Right.
So it sounds like we don't want the offense of the cross to be removed.
Right,
We
exactly.
want the offense of the cross.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, okay. I think I understand what this means, but I still think I'm hearing you say the opposite thing
He
No.
wants it to
by
be a
saying that
stumbling block.
the trap of not
It
believing.
does sound really weird. Yeah.
We
No,
want the
It's a
offense
strange
of
way
the
to phrase
cross.
it. It is.
Well, in other verse reference,
Yeah.
he clearly wants it to be a stumbling block.
Is
He
it-
says
It is a stumbling block.
Isn't
He
the
says it is a stumbling block.
Right. More than he wants it to be, it is a stumbling
Yeah.
block because they don't understand it.
innocent man died?
Yeah.
Offense of the cross. Innocent man died for everybody else's thing. That's
Yeah.
offensive.
Yes.
Right. Is that
Well, that's not only offensive. Think about it. If you're a Judaizer, what's the offense? Grace alone, no law. That's the offense right there. Because the cross is literally saying the law is dead, among other things. In this case, I think you got to tie it into the law is dead. And what Paul's really saying is, with the law being dead, that is the offense. And the trap they're falling into is still believing in the law, and that trap will actually lead them into hell.
I was thinking the opposite, and that the trap is
Well, the cross becomes,
actually believing in the cross. So it's an offense to Judaizers. The
Right.
cross is the offense
yeah,
to Judaizers.
right. The way it's phrased here, because again, remember, your first half of your verse is saying something that's not true. It's saying, if I were preaching this, which is not true.
do you understand where my brain's going on this?
I don't know, but I mean, I see the cross is an offense,
Right.
period.
Yes.
Okay. However, if the law is the way, then the offense of the cross is no longer the truth. So there's nothing to be offended about. It's just wrong.
Hold
So
on. But the cross is not an offense.
Oh, it is.
the
It is.
the
To non-believers.
the offense of the cross is the innocent man dying for my sin.
That's-
This cup.
That's
That's part
certainly
of
part of
that's
it.
part of
Part of
it.
Yeah.
The offense could also be that you're talking about the grace. Like, it's offensive to me because you're saying that I can't do anything
Right.
on my own.
Exactly.
And I want to be able to do it, and I find that offensive.
And I've
So
had
that
this.
I am
I've had-
powerless.
If I can follow the law and
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it, then,
right. Yes.
then all of that goes away.
Right.
Right.
And Paul's saying that if I were preaching circumcision in the law, then nobody would be after me for about this because I wouldn't even bring it up the cross because the cross would be an offense that we didn't even worry about. So I think that's where, let me say it this way. Don't worry about the idea of the snare or the trap. Even where you think of it as offense, that's fine. Yeah.
I understood what this was saying.
Yeah.
It just did not. Now that we've talked about it here, I was clear in my head.
Okay.
But just like how we were talking about it got me wrapped around an axle.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
okay.
think we have unwrapped the axle
Yeah.
here, and I was good.
And not only that, it is a strange way for Paul to phrase it. And then when you start digging deeper into it and looking at it, it becomes stranger. So I have no problem with that. It's just a matter of that's the way it is.
Is
And-
he just though trying to frame it in terms that they'll grip?
Yeah, if you want to look at the overall picture, basically what it's saying is, if I followed their lies and taught their lies, they'd be cool with me.
Yeah.
And you get that out of the verse. That's basically that's the important part of it there. And the important part of that is that's the same exact thing we got going on today. It really is. I mean, not only that, look at who's attacking people at rallies. Okay, do you see pro-lifers attacking the abortion people and stuff like that? No. On the other hand, do you see on any number of issues where people are being physically attacked, by the ones, what's always coming from the far left with the physical attacks usually. And virtually always, let me put that, I should say always, virtually always. And it's funny because the way we got it now, and not to offend you, but the FBI, you wouldn't be, but the FBI has declared, white supremacy and right-wing stuff to be the most, the dangerous terrorists. Some actually said the most dangerous terrorism.
Well, that was the president who said that.
Okay, yeah.
Not the FBI.
Okay, sorry, yeah, you're right. I don't want to impugn someone unfairly. But the point is, I think a lot of the FBI went along with that in their actions when you look at it. And the point is that, wait a second, that's, when I look at who's attacking people, do white supremacists do that? Sure, they probably do. But, they do. But is that really the main group that I'm seeing attacking people in this country? No. It's the other side. Now, the other thing, too, is I want to say here, I'm looking at two bad sides. I'm not trying to put the church in the group with the white supremacists, okay? What I'm saying is you've got two sides that are terrible here. But again, the group that is really terrible, usually look at what's happening with the group that would be against the biblical messages. And in truth, both of those groups are against the biblical message.
Other question, this is more of a grammatical thing, I guess.
Okay.
But, you've been saying, if I were to preach circumcision.
Yes.
But if I, brethren, still preach circumcision,
yes,
is the way my translation reads.
And that's a good translation.
Now, that's the difference between subjunctive mood. Is that one of the... there's indicative mood.
Let me say, no, it probably is. It probably is. Now, let me look at it here. It's the mood of possibility. Do you see?
It's the regular present verb.
Oh,
If I'm still preaching this,
yeah. But is it indicative or subjunctive?
indicative.
Okay, I guess you're saying it as a fact. He can say it either way. Saying if I were doing this as a fact. What you're talking about.
But the way you're Linda's reading it, read it again. Say what you said again.
What do I say? If I am still preaching
if I am
circumcision.
still preaching.
Right.
Because it's like.
But it is contrary to fact.
Yes, and that's what he's saying. It's contrary to fact. I would have thought he might have used subjunctive there, but he didn't. He could use either one, I could see. Mm-hmm. Let me say this, what Clint's talking about is two of your biggest moods in Greek are indicative and subjunctive. Indicative is typically your mood of factual things. This is happening, whatever, okay? It doesn't matter if it's past, present, future, anything else. Indicative is more of the factual type things, okay? And that's not a tense, it's a mood, okay? One of the other big moods is subjunctive. It's the mood of possibility. As I've joked with Linda, I call that the romance mood. Anyway, but the mood of possibility
if
means...
I love you...
Yeah, well, yeah, mood of possibility is might happen, might not type thing, if you see what I'm saying. That's literally
if
what
I
it
were
means.
a rich man, like in a
Yeah,
film.
that's kind of the thing there. So, if, for example, in a lot of cases, when you see something thrown forward that's not factual, you'll see it in the subjunctive mood. And there's other uses for it as well. This is a very, very high-level gloss I'm giving you here. But the one is more indicative mood is more like, and we have this in English, but we don't really spell it out as well. The indicative mood is more like, these are facts. The subjunctive mood is more like, it might happen.
Yeah, we do change our verbs a little bit.
We do.
When it's subjunctive.
Yeah. And not only that, there's also things where there's different things where sometimes subjunctive might mean, well, if this were to happen, and other times it means, well, if this were to happen and we know it's going to happen. So, I mean, there's a number, all that could be indicative also. There's a number of different things. I don't want to try to give a Greek lesson here today, but the point is, just to understand what you're bringing up, yes, you're right. I would have thought it might have been subjunctive here, but I think the reason indicative is used is because he's just stating it as a fact.
It's simple present tense.
Yeah, it is. If I were preaching, well, not in present tense, but indicative mood, you're saying, instead of subjunctive.
Yeah.
Point is, it's a fact. If I were doing this, they'd leave me alone. They'd think I was cool.
Well, and he was doing it. So he's like, if I were still doing it.
If I were preaching circumcision, which he's not doing.
Well,
exactly.
he used to.
Right.
Yeah.
Long ago, yes.
Yeah. If I were still doing
Yeah, exactly.
that,
If I were still preaching, yes, exactly. If I were still preaching circumcision. So, yeah.
If I were.
Well, when did he stop doing that?
When Christ met him. Road to Damascus.
Oh, Paul.
Damascus,
Right, yeah, Saul at the time.
Saul changed to Paul, exactly. And at that point in time, I think, let me give you a personal opinion on this. There's several reasons for it. I'm not going to go into it. I believe that not only did Paul encounter Christ and have a meeting on the road to Damascus, I believe certainly at that point, and then possibly continuing on for a while, he got direct instruction from Christ.
Yeah, didn't he? He went away for like a
3 years
year,
to prepare.
a couple of
3
years
years,
before he
yeah.
went to anybody
Yeah.
else.
And I believe during that 3 years that he was actually getting direct instruction from God.
Well, he-
You're saying, but that's not in the Bible.
It hints
Yeah,
at
yes.
it, so I would never say it's true. I would say I personally think that there's a good possibility of that. I wouldn't stand on it and say it's true.
Well,
He-
he said he spent 3 years in a row.
Right. We know he did the 3 years.
Yeah.
But was it actually Christ coming and teaching him as well during those 3
He
years?
didn't
Maybe.
say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
In another place, he says, talking about the thorn in his flesh. 3 times I asked, but I was given this thorn, messenger of Satan to torment me because of the surpassingly great revelations given to me by Jesus Christ.
Yes.
He actually says it
Yes.
in there.
Now we don't know where those revelations.
We don't know if it happens in the 3 years.
Was it 5 minutes on the road to Damascus, or was it
Three years.
Was it 3 years of Christ coming back and hey, you got to remember this when you're teaching. You got to remember that. Considering how Paul taught,
I think it was Arabia.
I think it's too.
yeah, in Arabia. Yeah, I would agree. I think it was Arabia, but I think there's a good chance that Christ was actually teaching him.
Yes.
So that's what I personally believe was probably happening. But I couldn't say to you that absolutely happened. If you have a different opinion on that, great, no problem. So that's fine. That's fine. I try to separate what I believe to be
Sure.
things that are opinion versus like this is what the Bible says. Yeah.
You think those 3 years is also where Jesus showed him how much he would have to suffer for his name?
Might well. Let me say this. I also have another personal opinion. Possibly during those 3 years or at the end of the 3 years. I believe that, and this goes against what most people believe, I believe there's a very good chance that the book of Hebrews was written by Paul or possibly Paul and Luke together. And I believe it was one last chance, one last appeal to the Hebrews, almost the gospel to the Jewish people to say, look guys, please my brothers. If you look at Romans 9 through 11, for example, Paul is just heartbroken about what's happened to the Jews.
Yeah.
So I think there's a good chance that there's one last shot.
But everybody that talks about the Greek,
Yeah.
know, the Greek that is Hebrews is written in.
But Hebrews is written.
It's a lot different stuff.
It is, but it's also a lot different book. And so you've got to be careful about that. There's also a lot more similarities than people give it. But here's the other thing too. If you look at it and compare it to Luke's writings, well, gee, the Greek looks pretty good, but that's not how Luke usually talked. But on the other hand, if you've got Paul talking and Luke writing, there's all kinds of opinions on Hebrews,
Sure. Yeah.
But I believe personally there's a good chance Hebrews was an early book, not a late book. That Hebrews was before Paul made his pivot and turned to the Gentiles.
The unassailable logic of Hebrews.
Oh, it is.
Makes me think it's Paul.
That's what gets me. I mean, Hebrews to me is like Romans written to Jews. It really is. Both of them are like incredible legal briefs.
Yeah.
So that's a personal opinion. Feel free to disregard it. Please don't stone me for it. Other than that, feel free to do whatever, okay? You can curse me, but don't stone me. Okay, anyway.
It doesn't say at the end, see what large letters I'm using. I'm writing with my own hand.
That was in Ephesians,
It
wasn't it?
actually, so I've been listening through, and I think almost in every book, he's like, I'm writing this with my own hands. Every single letter, I am writing this. I'm
Well,
writing
what he's doing is I think he's writing the endings to them, because if you look, he clearly used an amanuensis also. Amanuensis, by the way, is a scribe. But he clearly used an amanuensis, but at times he came on and said, look, I just put my name, it's almost like the John Hancock on the Declaration of Independence type thing, okay? And he certainly did that to show them how much he cared.
Right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen in Hebrews, so.
No, it doesn't.
So
But
that could have been Luke the one that wrote.
yeah, Luke also, in addition to that, he didn't do it in every book either. So I mean, there's a lot of books where he didn't do that as well. So I don't have any problem with it either way. And again, I would say this: there simply isn't enough evidence anyway to say conclusively who wrote Hebrews or the time it was written. You could really see Hebrews as anywhere from about 45 AD on up to about 80 AD, depending on who wrote it and how. Not only that, there's an awful lot of stuff in Hebrews about the temple. And you would think that if Hebrews was written after 70 AD, it would be talking about, remember what the temple was.
Yeah.
Not positive. Again, that's not a positive thing there, but it's something that normally 70 AD is a real threshold event where basically things written after that tend to look different than before that if you're talking about a Jewish writer.
Right.
And there's a good reason for it. You couldn't go make their offerings anymore.
Destroy.
Yeah, exactly. So,
There's also anybody of any significant intelligence can change the way they write
Yeah.
based on what they are doing.
Mhm.
A letter to a church.
I agree.
A letter to a church might
Right.
be written in a certain way versus something else.
Right.
I mean, we all do that.
I agree.
Like
Well,
texting
yeah.
versus an email versus a document that's.
It's one of the reasons I have no problem with Paul writing Hebrews is because, yeah, he would have written differently to Jews than he would have to non-Jews.
Right. Yeah.
Different
Sometimes-
thought patterns.
Yeah.
Sometimes the letters were in a specific. Actually, was it all of the time? The letters were in response to something specific that was going on.
Not
Sometimes
all
a
the time.
letter
Some,
that
a lot of
came,
them were.
or just like an event
Yeah.
or something that
You
was
have
happening.
general epistles versus the specific epistles that are related to events. You have both. And the general epistles were basically like, here's some doctrine I'm giving you and you guys need to know this. Might have been some event or something. Other epistles are like, hey, Galatians is a good example. What are you doing, you morons?
Right.
That type of
And
thing.
so any decent communicator then knows his audience
Right.
and
Right.
fashions his
Exactly.
examples and words all
Yeah.
to meet that particular
Right.
audience. So it's going to change.
And don't get hung up on what I said about Hebrews because I can't prove it. It's just, it makes sense to me, but I can't prove it. The other thing also, one of the other reasons I bring that up is Paul and Luke traveled together as missionaries. So it wouldn't be, it's not like you're saying, some guy that he's never met before. They were together. I think there's a good chance Hebrews was written right in the very beginning of the link between Paul and Luke. Now again, personal opinion there. If I'm wrong, I'll let God work it out and punish me for that one. So anyway.
But you won't be punished.
Exactly. A couple other things I want to bring out here. And I know we're running a little long. We started a little late. The verses you were talking about the Jewish and the Gentiles is 1 Corinthians 1, 22 and 23. And it was in that, it actually says it was an offense to the Jews. That was an offense. And it was foolishness to the Gentiles.
Oh, okay, so it was
And that makes sense.
scandalon to the Jews.
Right, the scandalon was an offense because it really to them,
Yeah, right.
and it was a snare too for the Jews because they're like, hey, I got the law, I don't need the cross.
So
The
it
cross
was a scandal to the Jews in
yes,
the verse you
and
read.
foolishness to the
and-
Gentiles.
But also in this passage
Yeah.
in Galatians.
What verse was that?
1 Corinthians 1, 22 and 23. And it makes sense also. if you think about-
Scandal in Galatians 5,
Yeah.
10, 11 that we just looked at.
Yep. And if you think about it too, to the Gentiles, it makes sense to be foolish. They had no background that would lead them into it. The Jews had a natural advantage, they just didn't take advantage of it in many cases. So that's what we're talking about there. The other thing I was going to say is, if you think about it, when talking to the Jews in particular, okay, either one, really, take either one, let's put it that way, the Jews or the Gentiles. Have you ever thought about trying to describe a color to a person who's blind from birth?
Yeah, right. How do you do that?
Yeah, how do you do it?
Yeah.
This is red. Remember what red looks like? This. Remember, how about this is purple? That's red and red and blue combined. A big deal.
Well, you can convey kind of the formal relationships between the colors.
Oh, you can,
But you
but
can't,
you can't.
let them visualize
Right.
the colors.
But you're trying to convey. Yes, red and blue make purple. Fine. What's red? What's blue?
I know.
Yes, you can. It's all right.
But I got these verbal
Right.
constructs,
Right.
and I can understand some relations between them.
Yeah, but from there, man.
But they're just verbal constructs.
Right. They're verbal. It's almost like you're just giving them mathematics. It's just an equation.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
You'd have to go with things like, well, this is how I feel when I see this color,
You might.
right? Like the warmth or the.
But let me say this: you might be able to do that. You might be able to do that.
How else would you describe it to somebody who's colorblind?
But the point is, I'm not colorblind, but blind from birth.
Well, I mean, either way.
Yeah. But the point being is that when you're talking about that, when you're thinking about that, it's not that it's impossible to convey anything, but it certainly is something where, yeah, it would be foolishness. Almost like the same thing with the Gentiles in particular. Yeah. One other thing I was going to say in relation to this is that the cross is still a stumbling block for non-believers. I mean, let's face it, they don't take well to it. There's different reasons. I mean, some people, they know so much science it couldn't possibly be wrong, therefore, well, one of the things is if you really know science, you start to find out a lot of things that we trust as science are garbage. And I mean, again, I go back to the laws of thermodynamics and evolution. Cosmic evolution doesn't work if the laws of thermodynamics do. It's that simple. You've got to have something that created the matter, energy, mass to start with. That's something that you never hear evolutionists want to talk about, or when Stephen Hawking tried to talk about it. Well, we got this mass and energy ball from another universe. Where'd that universe come from? And by the way, that universe has different laws of thermodynamics. Yeah, tell me about
I've
it. That's
asked
a good
AI
one.
about it and had a fun conversation, and it basically was saying that the variables everything was so fundamentally different at that time.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like,
Oh, I know.
well, how do we even know that they were different? Like, you know, and
Where'd you get
Well,
that?
if you look at human evolution and start looking at species jumps, well, we don't have any history of any species jumps at all. And what they forget is, well, you had something that mutated. Okay, first off, mutations are normally bad. Take the eyeball, for example. You get a mutation, unless you get 46 mutations that happen to work at the same time in the same place, 46 of them, you got a useless eyeball because there's 46 separate systems in the eyeball. And without any one of those systems, the eyeball is useless. But let me give you something else to think about also with human evolution. It's species, all the different species that came up. Every time you had a species jump, you had to have a mutation. But that's not good enough. You had to have 2 mutations at the same time, at the same place, one male, one female. Because when you go, at some point in time, you're going from asexual to sexual reproduction. When you do that, I don't care where you place it in the chain, you had to have 2 mutations, simultaneous, same place, one male, one female.
do you believe? Okay, so how do things happen? Like when you have a wolf, and now we have domesticated dogs.
See, we're talking about the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is adaptation which occurs.
Right.
Fur colors change and things like that. That's micro. That's no. If you look at that wolf, it's still a wolf. You don't have anything where that wolf suddenly has morphed into a different species, unless it's a crossbreed, which do happen.
There are still wolves, but now there's dogs. Were the dogs back during the time of the ark?
Oh, there was something. We don't know. I doubt that there was all. I don't think he took every species of dog.
Right, he took one of each kind or something. Right?
Yeah. So whatever he took got it worked out. But microevolution we agree with. Macroevolution is where we have problems, and also biological evolution is where we disagree. In macroevolution, that's the other thing too. Is when you get in a debate with a scientist or something, a lot of times they'll take macroevolution and microevolution and just call them evolution and try to mix the two together. They're completely different things.
I've never heard of those terms, so it's
they're scientific terms.
Yeah.
Micro and macroevolution.
But I always thought it was something like, if two animals, I mean, like, like there's two different breeds of dogs can create a new breed.
Oh yeah.
I thought it was something like that. Like, that's not really evolution.
Those are all the same species.
Well, that's microevolution, not macroevolution.
But they're considered the same species.
Give an example of macro.
Exactly.
Is a dog and a wolf the same species?
Oh yeah.
Can a dog and a wolf interbreed?
I have no idea.
Some
I
cases.
thought the Russians tried to do that.
I'd like to answer that.
Okay, go
'cause
ahead.
I just read an article this week.
Okay.
I saw 2, they looked like gray wolves to me. I saw them crossing back by the pond
Oh yeah.
about 2 weeks ago. And I thought, wolves? Does Maryland have wolves? Or are those just really big coyotes?
Yeah.
But they're not the right color for coyotes. Are they dogs? So I started looking it up, and we actually heard calls the other night, 2 different kinds. It was probably coyotes, but apparently coyotes and wolves have bred, and they've created an entirely new species that now really is its own identity.
It's a hybrid.
It's a hybrid.
Exactly.
It ends up being like coyote, wolf, and dog. Right. The 3 ended up together, and now they really are their own species.
Well, it's like
but that's micro.
That's
horses and donkeys.
Yeah.
Horse and donkey makes a mule.
They end up sterile all the time in that case,
right.
but yes.
Exactly.
But typically any of these
they can interbreed even though they're different species.
Now let me say this. I was only using this as an example, evolution, science. You've got all kinds of people. Some people, it's across the stumbling block because they want to keep sinning. Other people, it's a stumbling block because they have pride. You can use any one of these things. And not only that, how many people have you met that are willing to take Jesus as long as he doesn't get to meddling in it in their lives?
Right.
If you're talking about a life preserver, no problem. If you're talking about change your life because you are now a believer, whoa, wait a second. That's a whole different story. I believe that the Holy Spirit needs to open their eyes for them to understand. Okay? There's a general revelation of the world we see in Romans 1. But beyond that, that's not enough for salvation. Somehow there's got to be something that clicks and the Holy Spirit opens their eyes. And at that point, they're able to say yes. So I do believe it's a free will thing still, because you've got to say yes, but I believe also the Holy Spirit opened their eyes. The reason I bring this up also is because if you are witnessing, have you ever met people that are discouraged? I've been witnessing every day faithfully for 6 months or a year or 2 years, and I haven't seen anybody come to Christ. Okay? Or maybe there's a problem with how they're witnessing, but most likely that's not the issue. You know what it is? The Holy Spirit didn't get involved in those, and it wasn't time for those people to be involved. It's not a scorecard. And it's not something where we are never called to save anyone. We're called to bring the message. We're not responsible for the people that ignore it.
See, this is where we get into our own little check boxes.
Yeah, it does.
Right?
You're right.
And we lose sight of what the relationship is.
Right.
Right? And it's just, the relationship is about being faithful to what God wants us to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, poor Jeremiah.
Oh yeah.
Like, you're going to tell him all these things and nobody's going to believe you.
Mm-hmm. But you know what that accomplished?
Keep going.
Yeah. You know what that accomplished when Jeremiah did that? No one could say,
Yeah.
we didn't know, we didn't hear. It laid the blame right on the people who deserved to have the blame laid on them. So a lot of times, I do believe there are times we need to witness just to not be nasty, but literally just, okay, you people need to hear it. What you do with it is up to you. So again, on this thing here, I think we have to be just careful as far as don't take it as a personal thing if somebody doesn't come to Christ. I look at my life, I think I've witnessed a fair amount. At times when I've seen people come to Christ with me right there, with the two of us, face to face, probably 6 or 8 times, where I'm absolutely convinced there's no question they became believers, okay? That's not a lot, if you think about it. Now, unfortunately, compared to most believers, that probably is 6 to 8 times more than they've ever seen, okay? But it may be their fault, it may not be. If you're not witnessing, it's your fault. On the other hand, if you are witnessing and people are not coming to Christ, no, don't worry about that. That's not the problem.
You might be just one step in the chain.
That's what I can say to you. You may be the spreader as opposed to the harvester.
Right.
You may be the person who's breaking up the ground beforehand. All of that. The reason I talk to people about evolution and stuff and try to break down their theories of evolution isn't, I don't expect for me to say, think of microevolution or macroevolution, the laws of thermodynamics, and they go, yes, I believe in Jesus now. Not going to happen. Okay. But maybe I'm a link in a chain that's breaking down one of these arguments, and they start saying later on, hey, wait a second, how do I know that's true? Did you have your hand up? Oh, I thought I saw your hand.
That also reminds me of a movie I saw, and in the first 5 minutes, a badly animated alien comes down and basically tells the human, nope, there's no God.
Yeah.
I was like, if there's an alien, that doesn't mean that there's no God. Where are you getting that from?
Exactly.
God can't make aliens?
Well, let me say this real quick. I'm going to close on this. We got to close out now. I personally believe there's a very good chance that a lot of the UFO stuff, and I do believe we're seeing UFOs, but I believe they may be connected to demonic activity. Because one thing, if you ever listen to the message of them, the abductions and stuff, almost every one of the messages talks about a universalist idea, discredits God and things like that, and it's like, why would that happen? And I also believe there's a possibility that, if you look at the book of Revelation, I believe there's a possibility that these spiritual beings that we know nothing about suddenly will show up, and now we understand, and we're in the first part of the tribulation, and now these spiritual beings are explaining it to us, and they're demons. So I'm not saying they are, I'm saying that personally I think there's a very good chance that the UFO phenomenon, maybe not entirely, but at least, and Linda believes the same thing, at least in a port, and let me say, it's not just the two of us. I've actually heard other people recently talk about this. I mean, we believe this for 30 years or so, 20, 30 years at least. But I've now heard more popular preachers come out and talk about this, that they believe the same thing.
That's terrifying.
It is. Could be wrong. But think about it. How would you get all the people to just, we're going to unite, we're going to be one world, we're going to do everything else? Because these super beings that have more intelligence than us have come down. The other possibility is it may be AI. But either way, I think the demons being in this are more likely. But that's a personal opinion. I can't back that up with scripture.
The interesting thing about AI is, though, it's decentralized.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily...
Which is a good thing. If it was centralized, I would be terrified of that.
Well, there are some things that have been happening recently. I won't have time to go into it, but yeah, I'm starting to get more worried than I was.
Yeah.
But primarily also, if we give control to the AI is the issue also.
Yeah, I'm fine with it being something you ask,
Yeah.
and it being distributed versus something it's like in your head. And
Well, yeah. Let me go ahead and close this in prayer. And like I said, I don't want to hold you too long tonight, but...
So did we get to verse 12 or?
I thought verse 11, didn't we?
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we'll start on verse 12 next
So
week.
we'll get to mutilate.
Yes, that's next week with circumcision of no value. Exactly, that's next week. I would do it now, but we're out of time.
That's fine.
So, okay.
Good.
All right. Father, I thank you for being here tonight. I thank you for the relationship you've created. I thank you that we can look at your word and dig into it more deeply. That we can learn from things that were written to Galatians 2,000 years ago. I thank you for all you've given to us. And I do ask that you would help us to apply this through this week. In Christ's name, amen. Yeah, I've been seeing more things with AI that surprised me. And I'll say this.